Okay, so can you tell us your name?
My name's Claire. I live in London. I'm originally from South Africa. And I've been in England for about 14 years now.
And is this story about you or a child or?
I've got a bit of both to mention. It originated with my experience. I used to work in the medical field. I started as a medical rep. So I know a little bit of the inside story about how these drugs are sold to GPs, to pharmacists. I know what goes on in terms of really trying to convince the doctors to get them to prescribe your drug. It's all about bonusing and targeting, and you know, when they stopped allowing us to take doctors on fancy holidays and buying them expensive dinners and all sorts of jazz, and then it just became, well, you know, how do we make this more professional? How can we bribe them in a professional way? It was, you know, what do you need for your practice? What medical books can we buy? And what education do you need for your staff? And you know, I'm still very blessed that I was very fortunate. I ended up working for some very, very good companies, and I do feel like I made a grand impact with a lot of people. I worked specifically in the pain franchise, so it was a big passion of mine to bring quality of life to people. But I do also know, you know...
Who did you work for?
I worked for Janssen Seelag in South Africa. I worked for NAP Pharmaceuticals over here, and then I worked for a surgical company which wasn't selling drugs but then working with bone graft. So I was very lucky to work with some very good companies. But then of course you have lots of friends who are also reps, and we all had boots full of drugs who were all like sharing drugs with each other. This is just hard work. We were taken on conference, you know, 2-3 times a year, sometimes more than that. Always put in the best hotels, wined and dined, fancy dinners. And the majority of the time is spent teaching us about the new research that's out there. And you just know when you're working with drugs, if you can get anything that's better than placebo, you're doing really well. And if placebo's, you know, as high as 50-52%, you have to have your drug performing better than that. And very often it doesn't. And very often, if you're seeing successful results, it's not much higher than that. You'll never get like hugely massive statistical effectiveness, 90%. You just never hear of it. So for me, when I hear studies done showing that the MMR is, you know, 90% effective, for me it just rings bells, because it's very hard to prove. It's virtually impossible. Anyhow, you know, working in the medical industry, you get to meet some amazing people as well, but I guess that this email came through at one point, and it was an email to say that we all had to get the hepatitis B vaccine. At that point, I had no clue about the dangers of vaccines. Could literally blow me over with a feather for telling me, or even trying to convince me, that any vaccine was damaging. I trusted, still do for many of them. But even that, the question of me having to get a vaccine for something that I was not vulnerable to at all was a little bit odd. And so when we did question it and say, why would I need a hepatitis B vaccine? It was like, well, you're working around blood. No, I'm nowhere near blood. I'm not having promiscuous sex with my doctors. We're not sharing drug needles. There's no way I'm going to get hepatitis B. Well, that's the order. So I was like, okay, I value my job. I get the hepatitis B vaccine. I did have some flu-like symptoms within a week afterwards. Didn't connect the two at all. Within 3 months, it was around the June I got the vaccine. By the October, in fact, by the July already, I was experiencing a lot of anxiety attacks, a lot of shakes, very funny things happening with my vision. Couldn't put the two together, thought I was just working too hard. In October, we were away, and within 1 week, I lost 10 kilos. The clothes I went out with didn't fit me by the time I came back, and we were out there for 1 week. My GP actually phoned me to say that I was very, very sick. I'd had some blood tests done. They phoned me with the results. To cut a long story short, turned out I had a full-blown autoimmune disease. I developed Graves' disease, but there was also massive damage to my nervous system. I couldn't walk anymore. I really struggled to talk. Anything that was in like a pattern, if I had to follow a recipe, speaking a sentence, even though I knew what I wanted to say, the words were just not there anymore. There was something severed at different places in my brain. It was just not available at all anymore. I did fight for my life for 3 months. I was on humongous amounts of medicine to try to keep me alive, to stop me from having a heart attack. Horrible side effects from all of those. Horrible itching. I used to sleep in baths with... My husband would make me baths with like 20 chamomile tea bags in there just to be able to sleep. Really horrendous lifestyle, not a quality of life at all. And it was only when I started putting two and two together that I just wasn't healing, and this was not the life that I wanted to live. And I started also questioning that a person as healthy as I was, as successful as I was, just doesn't get sick like that. It just doesn't happen, not to that level. And so I started seeking alternative therapy. And I found a homeopath who was absolutely brilliant, and she really started asking me the right questions. She kept saying to me, Claire, this looks awfully similar to the other people I see who have vaccine damage, a drug interaction. Have you had any vaccines? Well, of course, this was almost 18 months later. So it took me a while to kind of work out that, well, maybe this time in June last year I did have to have a hepatitis B vaccine, but that's not the cause. And she said, would you allow me to do a therapy with you, the cease therapy, to feed a remedy made of the vaccine back to your body? I don't know all the technical things of it, but what I do know is that within 3 weeks, we started seeing a difference in my blood tests. And I started to heal, and this blew my mind. So I started researching, and what I found was very scary. One of the things that really it angered me, actually, it made me so sad, is that I'd given my life to this industry. And there's many areas I do feel I did a lot of good in, and that the doctors I worked with did do a lot of good. But fundamentally, the industry I was working for, I since found some paperwork that had said that hepatitis B rollout was an initiative from the government to roll out 500,000 hepatitis B vaccines to medical workers. 80% of the people in hospitals refused that vaccine. And so they rolled it out to the next layer of people, and reps were that layer. And I was one of the stupid people who fell for it and got it and almost lost my life to it. I then found out that initiative was started because they had 500,000 doses of hepatitis B vaccine which were about to go out of date. And that boiled my blood, because I know of other people who also at that time had that vaccine, and they had a similar situation happen to them. So it made me really question the fundamental ethics of what was happening. And then when I started to look at it, I realized that, for me, I was preaching the wonders and real necessity of medicine. And I agree with Dr. Humphreys, because I'm not going to throw, the baby out with the bathwater. I do still feel that there is a fundamental, really important, really critical place for medicine. But I do feel that there is this expectation that's been set upon that medicine can heal your every whim, your every woe, and that has made specifically Western civilization really dependent on something that cannot do that for you, and has also, and more importantly, made people believe that they're not responsible for their health anymore. And when you feel you're not responsible for your health anymore, what hope is left for there? You're going to live a life dependent on drugs and victim to a system that's keeping you sick. And that's when I realized I couldn't work for the system anymore.
What do you do now?
I run my own business. We run a health club, a very beautiful health club. I've very much delved into a natural world, a world promoting very clean, organic foods as far as you possibly can.
So you've gone from the dark side to the light.
You could call it that, probably.
And do you have children?
I do.
And how old are they?
She's 4.
Oh, 4.
She's
Okay.
4.
And did you vaccinate her?
Absolutely not.
Not one thing?
Not one thing. And I was really terrified when I had her because I still, by that stage, knew that it was the vaccine that had damaged me. But I didn't have, coming from a medical background and a scientific background, I wanted that. I wanted that proof. I wanted it in paper. I wanted that armor, that weaponry. And I was one of the ones who believed this study from the CDC, you know? And so I was still terrified to not vaccinate her. So I started looking. You can ask my husband. I don't think I slept. I mean, for weeks and weeks and weeks while I was pregnant. I just read and read and research and research and research. And I loved what Dr. Andrew Wakefield was working in, but he'd been so discredited, and my heart breaks for that poor man. I think he's very courageous.
He was set up. You need to know that.
Of course I know he was set up. Of course I know he was set up. But there was no way for me to give that as evidence to the people that were going to question me on why I wasn't going to vaccinate my kid.
Did you give birth in a hospital?
I wanted to give birth at home because I really wanted to avoid the hospital. Unfortunately, we had some complications. So yes, I ended up after 48 hours of labour with a hospital birth. I was very lucky. I prayed a lot. Please give me some decent midwives in the hospital who value natural birth and who value the way that I want to look after my child. And I was also advised to just keep quiet about, like, don't say you're not going to vaccinate. This is just going to bring.
And tell me how your child is. Is she healthy?
She's exceptionally healthy. I followed some friends' advice. These are also friends who haven't vaccinated their children. I know quite a lot of them now. They're all the healthiest kids I know. They're all ahead of their class. They're all ahead in their milestones. You know, the milestones that they're setting today are based on a population that their nervous system, their immune systems have been tainted. So when you see these kids who are excelling, it's profound. It really is profound. They've got, you know, exceptional health. Of course she gets sick. But when I see it in comparison to family and friends whose children have been vaccinated and vaccinated to the hilt, and even some vaccines, have always got snotty noses. They're always, you know, sick. They've always got some issue. They've always got allergies. My heart breaks for them, for the parents, the quality of life. What? It's continuously in doctors.
Did you give the vitamin K?
The vitamin K was given because we had a very traumatic labour. The midwives at the time and the gynae at the time were saying, you really need to give vitamin K. At that point, after 48 hours of labour and the birth I had, I didn't even realise that it was happening. I also didn't realise the damages of vitamin K.
They get the shot?
Yeah, she got the shot.
I think they generally do the shot.
If I'd had the choice, I would have given the drops. If I had the choice.
Actually, it's a very good question, and it reminded me to ask Dr. Suzanne tomorrow, because she had a very good talk on this to me. And done on Periscope.
Yes, and I think that's really necessary. That's probably one of the biggest questions I get, because I don't think I would give.
I'm not so sure that it's good. It's orally is still bad. Just saying. No, I'm not telling you.
Knowing now
what Suzanne told me Periscope.
Knowing what I know now, I wouldn't give anything. But knowing what I did then 4 years ago, if I'd had the option, I would have given her the shots. She's absolutely fine. I do know that, I didn't know this at the time, I only found out afterwards that the vitamin K shot is like 22,000 times the amount of synthetic vitamin K that they're ever meant to get. It's also got alcohol in it, it's going to attack their liver. Nicole did end up with jaundice. There was no reason for that to happen.
That's what we're finding, vitamin K.
Exactly.
Jaundice.
So she had it. She had it. Yeah. So yes, she's very healthy. If she gets sick, she bounces back really quickly. She's never been to a doctor. Because she's never need to go. Like if she needed to go to a doctor, I'd take her to a doctor. Of course I would.
Of course, you're a good mummy.
Thank you.
Thank
but
you for telling that story.
Thank you.
I'm going to tell my brother and Dr. Suzanne to keep their voice down. It's too noisy.